Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Mark Egge to talk about prospect research. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alex. It's great to be here. Long time listener, first time caller.
As if for a radio show, I appreciate that. That's cute. Okay, so then my first question, and it usually is your superhero origin story. How did you get started working with nonprofits?
Yeah, it seems that like most people, we're very clumsy around the black hole of nonprofits, which is to say, I fell into it. Um, I was working in a graduate program in music. I was, had finished all of my coursework and was working on my thesis and ended up needing a job. And so eventually found my way to the Indiana University Foundation in Bloomington, Indiana, where I joined their research department. And so it was just something that I hadn't planned on doing, but once I started doing that work, I was going, "Oh, this is kind of nice, and I can actually get paid for something that I'm not so bad at," and and it's not a slog or incredibly ridiculously competitive like the music space was that I was looking at. And so yeah, I decided to just stick with that and haven't looked back, haven't regretted it one bit. That's really how I ended up getting into the nonprofit space, and it's been almost 20 years now.
Wow. So I imagine there's quite a story getting into how you became known to do prospect research. I'm curious to know maybe the summary or the end tail of that story. How did you transition from wherever you were into, hey, this is a really cool area of study that I would like to spend more time doing?
Yeah, I mean the biggest thing, in that first year at the IU Foundation, it was really just kind of the realization of, oh, this is, I can do research. Research is research to some extent. It's all about finding information, and then to me, the most important part is figuring out how to interpret it. And it was interesting because my master's thesis, and I'm going to go hardcore nerd here for just a second. My master's thesis was about performance analysis in music theory, which is basically looking at a piece of music and then using, pretty robust music theory techniques to figure out how to interpret a piece of music for an audience, right? And usually, as a performer, you're just looking at the music and going by gut feel. This my thesis was focused on a methodology that would look for certain types of patterns, and it was dealing with modern and contemporary music, which didn't usually have patterns, but this was a way to impose a framework on it, right? But the big thing for me was, that translation of here's how we take all these little notes on a page and create a story with them, create a narrative, create something that is a bit more accessible for people. And I kind of thought about it in terms of, the translation to research was, as a researcher, my job was to find information on an individual and piece all that together and make sense of it, figure out what the story is, or what is, what's the tune here, what's the harmony, all that, and then interpreting that so that a fundraiser can understand that and work with it. So there was sort of this, oh, this is really what I have been doing, what I can keep doing this sort of thing, and I'm good at it. And so that was sort of the decision point in there. But at my path professionally from there was then I ended up at Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota. My wife and I wanted to get back to Minnesota because that's where we're from, and had the good fortune of being hired by someone there named Kathleen Foley, who was really one of the pioneers in the prospect research field. She actually was one of the founders of the professional association. At the time, it was the American Prospect Research Association, now known as APRA. Fantastic opportunity to work under her tutelage for a couple of years, but then she left, and she retired, and I took over the reins from her as director of the shop there, and was at Carleton for about 8 years. And that was a fantastic place to be, just simply because of the fact that it's really kind of the Cadillac of fundraising institutions when it comes to nonprofits. Not the Cadillac, but it's in that category where they do fundraising really well. All the best practices, all the things where you go, how do we do this in the way that is most effective? They're doing all of that, and so getting to learn in that space was really fantastic. So that was, I think, the space where I learned a ton and gained a ton of experience working in prospect research, but then also in prospect management. And I built out the fundraising analytics program there. We didn't have anything in-house. And so started building predictive models, and that's still going today there. So yeah, that was kind of like where I kind of grew up and really cut my teeth and started getting involved with APRA, Professional Association. Yeah, and after that, it ended up at Greater Twin Cities United Way, building out their prospect management program, and then eventually kind of expanding into more oversight at Hamline University. And then just last year, I hung out my own shingle and am working for me now. My boss he's an okay guy.
I love the transition from music to research. Like you were able to carry and see a harmony in doing research and finding the harmony, I should say, in building connections and following like that transition seemed like I wouldn't think that would be easy to do, but you found a way to do it where there was a synchronization of types. So that's beautiful to see.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the topics I can nerd out about a lot. And when you do a master's thesis, you put a lot of work in it, and if you don't get to talk about it, then you just feel like it's a lot of waste. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to kind of recoup some of those losses, Alex.
My pleasure. Okay, so let's paint a picture then for this podcast. The idea here is the way that I visualize it, as we were talking earlier, was there's this chasm, right? On one side of the chasm, you have prospect research, which we'll define shortly. On the other side of the chasm is making connections and using the information that you found on one side, on the other. And then there's a bridge between them, which is how do we take what we have and build it into some kind of story to be able to reach out to these people and build connections and hopefully, of course, get some funds, some grants and funds. So that's the kind of picture that I had in mind. And I'm curious if we could maybe just, if you want to add some color to that picture to make it maybe more complete from your perspective.
Yeah, the chasm and bridge perspective is a compelling idea. I think where I go with that is I've spent a lot of time, thinking about this, particularly in the professional association space, where we have, when I was on the board of APRA and president of APRA, like we were thinking about our 2,000 members and what their role is in the space of fundraising and development, and particularly major gift fundraising, because that's the space where research really makes a huge difference by and large. And in a lot of fundraising shops, there is a bit of a chasm or a wall or a division. And this sense of we're just finding information and we're just, sort of back office people who aren't necessarily thinking about relationships, and the fundraisers are the ones who are doing the relationship stuff. And I have found that the most effective work that we're able to do is when we are redefining that relationship and thinking about it not as two separate sides of a canyon or anything like that, but much more saying there are parts of a continuum on which, both sides can kind of lean towards the other and vice versa. And what I mean by that, particularly in the space of research, is that one of the things I like to say is the fundraiser is the best researcher because they have access to the primary source of information, which is the prospect themselves. And when we're able to talk about it from that perspective and say, all right, I'm the researcher who can go and find all sorts of information, in external spaces, looking at publicly available information. But I also know that there's certain things that I cannot find. There will be dead ends. There will be things that just are not known, but I can figure out what are the key questions where if the fundraiser is listening and is asking the right types of questions, they can help us understand more about what's going on with this prospect and understand their situation. Because in a lot of cases, the goal may be to, really understand what kind of financial picture the person has, or get some sense of like, where do they fall on, in terms of wealth. Are they the very, very high net worth? Are they lower? Where do they fit into that space? So we can make decisions about prioritization and where we want to invest more time and energy in terms of, building out fundraising capacity. But that partnership between the fundraiser and the researcher is huge. And when we do think about it in terms of, well, we're both doing research, and we're also both thinking about how do we best cultivate this prospect? How do we best engage them? How do we best help them feel connected to our organization? When we're both thinking about it that way, it becomes a lot less, I'm just looking for these, 10 things on my checklist. It's much more, I'm thinking about the human and what information can we find about that human and that's going to be beneficial for our really building a strong relationship with them. So that's kind of where I'd go with, the chasm. I mean, not to immediately shut down your powerful visual there, Alex. But to some extent, I think the value is in that space of thinking about it in a much more connected way. And also I think I'll take your bridge metaphor. That's a great one. I really like that actually, because when we are thinking about that bridge and that connection between the research side of things and the personal interaction and, actually engaging with the individual, that's the space where we can have really, really high impact. The best researchers, I think, are the ones who can think like fundraisers and help their fundraisers be, partners in that research.
In my visual, I wasn't anticipating like a huge chasm with a Indiana Jones style of rope bridge between them, but more like I wasn't sure exactly. But the idea is that, two divisions, two departments, they need to collaborate. The more they collaborate, the closer they are, the better things are. So the bridge could be really made of concrete and steel and reinforced everything. So, but the idea is that the bridge is really the most important part. If you're missing that bridge, right, then you have these two departments that are not quite communicating or not communicating well, and they each have their own skills, but they're not sharing what they are learning. And so, yeah, it's maybe not a perfect analogy. Like you said, I'm happy you poke holes in it or you like certain parts of it, but it was just a way to start the conversation, I guess.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, I'm not here to rag on you, Alex.
No worries. I can take it. So let's talk about then the one side of the chasm, because I'm going to stick with that going forward for this one at least. One side is the prospect research. So maybe you could define at a high level some three top goals of prospect research, maybe even a definition so that people are super clear for those who are not so clear. So benefits or goals of prospect research.
Yeah, I ultimately prospect research is really focused on knowing more about your prospects and the people that you're engaging with. And I use the word prospect to mean, people who are prospective major gift donors. So they may already be major gift donors, but they are prospective donors they are prospects for another large gift. And so we're not just dealing with people who are non-donors. And in fact, I would say that, you want to be starting with your existing donors because you have a connection to them. But ultimately, prospect research is about understanding more so that you can make better decisions and be more effective. And on the individual level, it's really about understanding who that person is. What does their financial situation look like? How, can we piece together an understanding of how they think about philanthropy and how they have been philanthropists or not, understanding where they're coming from, getting a sense of what's important to them. Those are all, some of the goals in that space of prospect research. And it varies depending on where you are in the process with them. So to my mind, most of the time, if you have someone that they've been giving to your organization, but it's been at a very low level, the first question is really around, is this someone that you want to be focusing your major gift officer's time and energy on, right? So, when you have a major gift officer, they are the only person, well, not the only person, but they're the person who is charged with talking to the donor, cultivating that relationship, and asking for a large gift. We have to be really careful about how we're using their time. And that's one of the values of prospect research, is being able to, make a smart decision about how you're going to use that time. So the first question for me is always, is this person wealthy? Are they capable of giving at the level that warrants attention from a major gift officer? And if the answer is yes, great, go see them. As we move further along in the cultivation process, we might dig in further and understand more about, what does this person's career path look like? How, can we get a sense of who they are and what types of constraints they had? And again, the fundraiser may be in a position to ask these specific questions or find out those things. But if we can help fill in the details with research, that's valuable. So, all the way through the process, there's opportunities for research to happen. But in a bigger, more macro sense, there's also the space of, getting into things like wealth screenings and looking at, broader, big picture sets of data and understanding, okay, where are the pockets of people or where are the groups of people, either based on certain indicators or, actual predictive models that you've built. How do you identify the groups of people that are going to be the most valuable to look at? That's the, sort of the bigger picture prospect research, which is, sometimes kind of falls into the analytics space. But that's, kind of the higher level on that. And then there's sort of the ancillary pieces too around prospect management, which was really the space of how do we continue to maintain focus on these people who are at the top end of our priority list, essentially. How do we help the fundraisers continue to bring their focus back to those people and think about, okay, this is the best opportunities with these 5 people. And how do we build out a strategy then? And that's a space where you start marrying the information that you're gathering, what you know about the people with the organization's needs, how you can go about putting together a really strong proposal for them. So that was a lot longer than just a few seconds, but I can go on quite a while about prospect research, but it really, it spans a lot of different areas. But I usually think about it in the very micro level of just an individual and what can we learn about that individual. But then there's also the macro side of how do we think about the larger groups and prioritize different segments of these to ensure that we're looking in the right places and investing our time and energy appropriately.
It sounds very personalized as well. You've been talking about focusing on one person who is wealthy and then following a decision tree. Is it normally like that, or do you see instances of looking at groups and then doing segmentation, or is it, this is one person that's really important enough that we do an individual research on them to really, really glean as much information as we can, get their financial status, using, to your point, wealth screening or using different models to be able to build a more accurate picture of what this person is capable of, and then the next steps are taken after. But is it really at an individual level, or maybe it's at a certain financial level that you go individual, and then when you're beneath a certain threshold financially, you look at it more as a group and analyze groups, and then have segments within those groups?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's both, and they're definitely tied together. They fit together, right? Particularly if I'm thinking about helping to determine the size for a comprehensive campaign or a capital campaign, something like that. There, we're really looking in the aggregate, and we're trying to say how many people do we have at these different levels, and so we're looking in bigger chunks like that and doing some of the math to say, all right, it looks like we've got 15 people who are capable of giving $1 million or more. Let's just kind of say that these 5, we can get 5 of those to come through there. It's a, a 1-to-3 ratio, for example, just kind of spitballing on that and say, all right, we get these, 5 people who can each do $1 million to $2 million. So we're looking at, we'll just kind of split the difference and say $7.5 million from those 5 people. Sort of chunking stuff out that way is one of the, I think, valuable functions of prospect research on that larger kind of more macro view of things, right? But then from there, yes, it definitely ties to the individual side where we're saying, as we start thinking about those top 15 people in that $1 million level, and then they, maybe self-select down to 5, we're going to be doing more in-depth research on them within that space. It does not necessarily make sense to, do in-depth research on people who are at the bottom of your wealth screening results, unless there are some other indicators that don't get picked up on a screening or something like that. But yeah, they definitely fit together where you're getting a sense of, all right, it's going to be worth our time and energy to do the research on these top 15 people because they are showing indications that they have the wealth to be able to give at the level that, can be, leadership level for our organization, for our campaign or whatever. And also there's a part of the process too, which is basically just kind of vetting, like the screening returns X amount of information. There's some amount of false positives in there. There's some amount of false negatives associated with that. But the research is really the process of vetting that information and confirming that, yes, this person is actually, this is the real deal. They have the capacity, or even understanding the layering in of, sure, they show up on a wealth screening, but do we have any indication that they are philanthropic in any way? Is this, is giving away money something that they have done, or that, or can we get a sense of what has that looked like, right? Oh, they give away $10,000 to 20 different organizations. The largest gift they've ever given is $10,000. They may not be thinking about $1 million gift at any time in the near future. It may be something that they're just not interested in, because presumably if they're, giving away at that level, then plenty of organizations are saying, can you do $1 million to us? But understanding more the lay of the land for that individual is for sure part of that process after you've gotten a sense of, which groups you're looking at. So it's for sure a both and it really just kind of depends on what are the business intelligence questions and needs that you have in that setting. I think I always get a little nervous when people are going, "Oh, we need X." And I'm like, well, maybe you need X. Let's talk about like what questions you're trying to answer, because that's going to determine whether you need X or Y or whatever else in terms of a research solution. And maybe it is that you need X, which is a full profile on this person, but maybe not. And let's make sure we understand where we are in the process, what specific questions you're trying to get a handle on, and what specific decisions you're trying to make. And that will dictate whether we're looking high level, whether we're doing a deep dive on this person, or whether we're just trying to answer one specific question about them on a particular topic.
Yeah, outcome focus. I love it. It's key to be able to answer all the right questions and ask the right questions. You need to know where you want to go first before.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You were kind of hinting at, or I'm drawing a connection here. There's some kind of formula, right, between as you're evaluating, screening, identifying these people, especially the larger possibilities of giving grants or giving donations. There seems to be some kind of formula of wealth, which is, to your point, only a portion of it. How much of a connection you already have with that person? How philanthropic are they? And I know that values, I'm sure, is an important criteria as well. This seems to be like a mathematical algebra type formula. Would you agree, disagree? Again, you can trash my example, but and if you do agree, all right, would you add to those kinds of three or four variables that you have to kind of look at to see? And I, of course, also very mathematical. Like I imagine at the end of the day, you get a kind of a score, right? Of this person has wealth, it has a strong connection to our organization already. They have aligned with our values. They are already philanthropic. Therefore, their score is significantly higher than if you have only one or two or three of those four criteria.
Yeah. You're in a friendly space here, Alex, because you and I think very similarly about these sorts of things, where I'm like, yeah, you can totally do a formula. You can score this stuff. And in fact, I mean, that's one of the things I really love doing, is to say, how do we take this thing? It's sort of like, can I develop a rubric to determine whether or not I'm in love with my wife? You can, and we can actually, boil that down. That some people would argue that's not very romantic, and no, it's not. And there is some piece of like, well, there's stuff there you just can't quantify. Which I'm like, yeah, but also you can kind of quantify everything, at least by proxy in some way, shape, or form. And what you're talking about is for sure a concept that has been embedded in everything I've learned, everything I've seen, everything I've been doing for a very long time. So I'm like, yeah, you hit the nail right on the head there. When I started at the IU Foundation, I remember the phrase they used was linkage, ability, and interest, which I'm like, okay, that's fine. Linkage, I say, okay, that's fine, because I'm not thrilled about it, but it works. Linkage is essentially, are they connected to the organization in some way, shape, or form? And there it was pretty easy. Yes, most of the people we're looking at are alumni. And so they have a linkage to the organization. The ability side is, what kind of capacity do they have? And then, what kind of interest do they have? Have they shown that they are engaged? They're not just linked to the organization, but they're interested in what we're doing in terms of showing up at events, volunteering, being just a regular donor, that sort of thing, showing interest in those different types of ways. And people talk about capacity and engagement, or there's a lot of different types of words, but to my mind, yes, you can really boil some of this down. And I think it can be really helpful to impose some numeric and scoring systems on that, because it helps sift things out pretty easily, right? If you go, even if you've got, two factors and you've got three levels of those factors, and you say, all right, we got levels 1, 2, and 3 on these two things. If as soon as you start breaking people into, this 3x3 grid, and you've got people who are in the upper right-hand corner, which is a 3 on one factor and a 3 on the other factor, you have immediately simplified your focus, or narrowed your focus and simplified the decision making to say, well, let's just look at the people in this one box, right? So for sure, that's a technique that is very valuable. I think in a lot of cases, when you think about people who are operating by gut feel, they're in the space where they're just kind of like, evaluating that intuitively, but that's not necessarily very scalable. So when you say, well, let's look at this and say, here's a proxy for interest, here's a proxy for capacity, here's a proxy for whatever, and these are the data points that we have, you can build out scoring to, get people segmented out in that way, which is another fantastic way to be, breaking people down and saying how many people do we have who have high capacity and also are very interested in us? How many people do we have that, have high capacity but haven't shown interest, and we might be able to move them along? For sure. I think the other thing with that too is always fascinating to me is fundraisers. I've been a fundraiser, so I can speak ill of this group because I've been one of them. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to trash. But I think in a lot of cases, when you're dealing with people a lot of the time, when you're in those face-to-face spaces, you're much more relationship oriented, relationally oriented, and you are operating from an intuitive and gut feel space, which is really valuable because you can get very good and having a very highly tuned and well-tuned intuition. The problem is that sometimes your intuitions may be wrong. And this is just part of being a human, is that we develop biases that we may or may not be aware of. And I love the analytics side of it, where particularly with predictive modeling, for example, you can statistically test to see if this one hypothesis that you have about, what determines or what the sort of indicators of engagement are, or indicators of likelihood of making a particular type of gift. You can do a regression analysis and figure out, yeah, these things are statistically significant in terms of relating to this particular gift behavior, which is that's one of the pieces that's really fun to me, is to be able to say, people keep saying this one thing about this is what a good prospect is. And how true is that? Can we look at that from sort of a mathematical perspective and say, yeah, that's actually very true, or it's true in these types of circumstances, or, where's that coming from? And actually, more often than not, what happens is people will have a conclusion or a judgment or something that is accurate, but it's not necessarily universally accurate. So it's, one of the things that I would hear sometimes at one institution I was at was, oh, people without kids give more. And I was like, that's sort of maybe, yes. And the logic was particularly around estate gifts and planned gifts, where someone is saying, I'm going to leave money to you in my will. Well, if you don't have kids, of course, you're going to be able to leave more. And also it makes that plan giving conversation easier, because if you say, have you thought about including us in your estate plans? The person doesn't necessarily come back with, well, I want to leave money to my kids. But from that particular perspective of that conversation, for sure, that is true. It is easier to have those conversations with those people. But when we looked at the actual numbers of overall, no, there was no difference between people who had children and those that did not in terms of how much they gave. But within a particular slice, it was like, oh, this is true. And so it's really fun to look at, it has been fun for me to look at, how do we take these hypotheses and sort of test them and understand where the truth really is in that? And then to use that in some of our decision making, in some of our analysis, in some of our prioritization, and say, yes, this particular insight is valid, and it's valuable, and we can use that, and it does work. I always get a little scared or nervous about, oh, we're going to look at X because this is the thing. And I'm like, well, that might be a thing, that may be a predictor, that may be an indicator, and great. But also let's expand our thinking on that and say, well, what can the data tell us about like how valid that is, and when is that valid, essentially? But all that is to say, yeah, we can take this and systematize some of this. And that's one of the things that I think is really fun about, the space that I'm in. I think a lot of prospect researchers and data people like myself, we understand the fundraising side, we understand the humans, and we can also say, well, let's put some rigor on this and find ways to think about, take this intuition type concept and apply it in a really big way so that we can sift out people and make better decisions about everyone that we're dealing with.
We speak the same language, because I get giddy like a little schoolgirl whenever I find something that subverts my expectations. When I think of,
Yeah.
first impressions, this makes total sense, let's do that. And then you realize after doing some data research or analytics or deeper research that you're completely wrong. And I actually enjoy that. It's cool to have, especially I take it from more of a psychological perspective of saying, okay, your first thought usually is not your best thought, even though it might sound logical at the first glance. But I love the fact that when you're proven to be wrong, or at least need a lot of refinement, I'm actually excited about that. I enjoy the satisfaction of being wrong in those situations.
It's so fun. I mean, like, it's such a strange thing to say. It's like, man, I love being
Totally.
wrong. But
Totally.
there is that piece of like, oh, there's something here that I didn't know. And what is that? And how do I understand that better? So it's for sure a really fun place to be. And it does require, like, I really got to let go of my ego a lot of the time and go, no, you're wrong, and that's okay. But let's find out what part of that was right, because something in there probably was, and what were you seeing that was informing that initial hypothesis? And the other thing in this space too that I is really fun is if I can take someone else's hypothesis and then use that to sell my solution or whatever back to them, right? So they're going, I put a lot of stock in this thing, and I'm like, I will find the truth in that thing and then use it to say, look at this great idea you had. Now we've got this scoring system that incorporates your thoughts, big deal fundraiser, whoever. That's always fun too. So I don't have to tell them that they're wrong or anything, but I'll find the truth in what they're doing, and then I'll use it to get them to buy into it. Yeah, I mean, these are all the things around, data and insights and all that. That yes, giddy like a schoolgirl is a great explanation or a great descriptor.
And going back to your earlier point about relationships, I'm the same way where I try to quantify and qualify too much. And it's great in the business world. It's great, in the career, but not so great when trying to build a strong relationship because people don't like quantifying everything. But there is a book, and maybe you've read it. It's called How to Measure Anything, Finding the Value of Intangibles in Business by Douglas W.
I
Hubbard. And that's a brilliant book because
I
to your point,
literally got that book for Christmas.
well, there you go. Because you can pretty much measure anything. Yes, there's going to be a degree of accuracy and there's going to be a range, but you can pretty much measure anything, even things that you don't think you can measure. To your point, there are proxies or other mechanisms to be able to do that, and it allows you to. The minute you quantify things, I don't know. To me, by being more of a numbers person, I find you can just do more with it. Versus if it's just colors, sure, it's beautiful to look at, but I can't build something from colors. I can build something from numbers, though.
Mm. Well, I mean, have you tried paint by numbers?
Well, there you go. Yeah. And you
We
can, I'm
found the
sure,
bridge, Alex. You
I'm
can
sure
do
we
it.
can
It's
assign.
amazing.
I'm sure you can also assign numbers to colors, and then, but it still has to be translated to a number to be able to do something with it by itself. If you just have colors, then it
Yeah.
might be,
Well, but
yeah.
I mean, when you look at like generative AI in terms of like image generation, it's taking everything as a number and saying, okay, statistically speaking, what's let's look at the next pixel out. What color is that going to be, right? It does not see a face when it's generating a face. It's going like, okay, I've looked at a billion of these types of images. I've got this pixel here. Generally speaking, what's the next one out here, right? And it is doing that paint by number thing from a really high level, random, calculated level. So I'm like, hey, we're not that far from it. As terrifying as that might be, but yeah, and that's a space where I go back and forth because I'm kind of like, it seems too glib to say that, oh no, we really can, everything can be reduced down to models because or numbers, and that sort of that side of things. I there's a magic space in there somewhere that I'm not willing to give up, and call me crazy, but it's but I mean, there's a lot where I'm like, yeah, I think we're a lot closer to it than we think, and can lean into that in certain types of ways. My concern is getting fooled by that and thinking that, oh, okay, these are the same things, like this image that was generated or whatever is beautiful, it's amazing, and therefore it's well inspired, and there's some magic to it. I'm like, no, it's just a big algorithm that like threw a bunch of stuff together and I happen to like it. But I digress.
That's opening up a whole Pandora's box that I want to get into regarding AI. But before we get there, there was a point you made rather about a gut feeling, and I know I read in one of the research materials you sent to me to help me prepare for this is a cute story about one fundraiser who had a gut feeling about a prospect, and I was wondering if you could just summarize and add, make sure the punchline is there for that story because I think it's a beautiful story that needs to be shared.
Yeah, that you call it a beautiful story. I lived it. It was a little painful. That's why I'm double clutching a bit here. I'm like, oh, is that the same story? But the short and long of it was there was a prospect at this organization. The fundraisers were very excited about this person, and they were ready to make an ask for, I think it was, $250 or something like that. And this is someone who was giving $25,000 a year. Was going to take on this, sort of chair role for this campaign, and so they went to all this work to put together a proposal for a $250,000 ask because they're going, well, 25, 10 times, this person's usually giving $25,000. 10 times that seems more than enough. very, and very aggressive. So let's make sure we've got a spiral bound proposal with all sorts of pictures, and we're going to work with the program staff and spend all this time and da 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 da. And they go to meet with the prospect to begin the conversation. And she basically preempts them and says, well, I've been thinking about it and I'd like to do $500,000 gift. And this is literally as the fundraiser is reaching down to grab the proposal that says 250, which immediately they're like, not grabbing that because we don't want to, so of course, wow, amazing. $500,000. That's fantastic. That's twice what they thought they, we're going to be able to get from this person. Of course, yes, more money is good. That's happy. As a researcher in that moment, for whatever reason, we hadn't, we didn't have, hadn't built out the processes and all the sort of like, okay, let's make sure we're doing X, Y, and Z when we're getting to this particular ask level, which meant that they hadn't consulted research to say, let's dig into this person and really understand what their financial capacity looks like right now and what they could be doing if we were to think about, what's the big idea here. There's a phrase that someone once told me about negotiating, which sort of applies here, which is the first person to name a number loses, which is, if you're in a negotiation setting and, you say, oh, I want 50 and oh, no, that's too high, right? So you just wait to say your numbers and you wait to see what the other person says. In this case, they didn't necessarily take advantage of that concept by understanding what this person could do. And, when I looked into it later, found out this particular individual, they sort of preempted the ask with this $500,000 gift. They could have done a whole lot more. We looked at their capacity and their liquidity. So this isn't just a matter of like, do they have a whole bunch of real estate or something like that? This is real money that they have acquired over some period of time because they were a public company insider. They were capable of giving a 7-figure gift or more. And had we done the work ahead of time to make that ask, and plan for the ask in a much more thoughtful way and say, instead of, oh, let's just put, this great proposal in front of her for 250, to say, what would it look like to get, to get her thinking about a 7-figure gift? We would have ended up with, 4 times what we were initially thinking, twice what she offered in that space. So it was, it was a very painful moment of, on the one hand, I'm going, I really want to celebrate with you all because this is great. More money is good. It's good for the mission, all that. And yet, knowing that we really missed an opportunity here, it was, I was the sad guy in the corner, having a hard time cheering on everyone. Did my best, put on a brave face, cracked some jokes. It was fine. But that was a moment for me that I was like, oh, it is so important for us to do our homework. It is so important for us to be very planful about these high level asks. And in fact, part of the issue there that I think was, one of the reasons that happened was that, I was leading the research shop at that time and it was like, oh, I clearly haven't built the relationships with the fundraisers that I thought that I had. Because had we, really built that and were we really in a good place with that, we would have had a lot more conversation before about that particular ask. And so it was a real lesson for me in that space as well. But it was definitely, it was interesting because it's when you're doing well and things are going okay, that's fine. But also, how are you making sure that you're looking for more opportunity? How are you making sure that you're thinking about the biggest possible whatever? And, this is one of the things I love about working with visionary leaders is they're saying, if we had $10 million, we're only raising 500,000 a year, but what if we had 10 million, we could do X. Well, now we've got a compelling vision to talk to a donor about and to, work with them on and to potentially inspire their highest level giving. And that's great as a researcher because then I can go, yeah, this person is capable of doing $2 million here for this particular thing. And we have the idea that fits with that may motivate them. So yeah, it was definitely a situation where, good outcome. I wanted to be really happy, but it for sure underscored for me the importance of doing our homework ahead of time and making sure that we understand what's really going on there. Because we definitely left at least $500,000 on the table, if not more.
I stand by my decision. It's a fantastic, awesome story, even if it is a bittersweet one. I'm curious to know, and I don't want to kick you when you're down or whatever analogy, but because you mentioned that you said that you didn't have a strong enough relationship with the fundraiser. Do you think that was maybe the point that needed to be improved? Was it the fundraiser who didn't want to have research, that didn't even prompt, that said, I know this person, I have the feeling, I don't need any kind of research to confirm what I already believe? Like, where do you think the point of failure is, or at least the point of, hey, maybe we should have done this? Just so if someone listening to the story, rather than just smiles and says, okay, great, like, is there a point of identification where you can say, look, this is a moment where you really do want to have a researcher to inquire because you could uncover things that you might not know about, and your gut feeling isn't the best source of truth.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few places to go with that. I think when in this case, this was within an in-house shop, and so we had the ongoing relationship and prospect research and prospect management in a really formalized, well-established, and robust um, arrangement was relatively new to the organization, and I think so they just weren't used to leveraging that and really leaning into that. And the fault on my side was really in the space of assuming that they had bought in and were on board with it much more than they actually were. Um, and so it was, I think, a little bit of me going, all right, we've been doing this a while and everyone gets it, and great, this is fine. But without like ensuring that it's undeniable, right? To some extent, if someone had said, do you know absolutely 100% for sure that, any solicitation of six figures or more is being sort of pre-vetted through research. If someone had pointedly asked me that question, I probably would have paused and said, oh, no, I should work on that. And this example really underscored that. And so to some extent, it's about, the understanding of like, do the people I'm working with really understand what's going on here, really understand what's at stake, what the, potential losses are. It's, and I did find myself in a really tricky situation there because everyone else is feeling really great about everything. Do I want to be the guy who comes in and says, hey, like, nice party, I'm going to throw out all your punch and tell you that, well, you could have done a whole lot more. Like, no one wins in that situation, right? Like, from an emotional perspective, I'm just going to alienate them. So I knew that I'm like, all right, well, that's not going to be the way to go about it. Need to find other opportunities to focus on what the potential is in that space. But when I'm dealing with, any organization where they do have major gift fundraisers, I do want to spend as much time as possible making sure that it's understood that you only have, a limited amount of time with each prospect. You only have a certain number of prospects. Your fundraisers only have a certain amount of bandwidth. And so, figuring out how to best use research at all the stages is really, really important, just from a prioritization standpoint, but also from a maximization standpoint too. And so a lot of it is about being able to put forward those sort of examples to say, if we limit our thinking to whatever the person has done versus what they could do, we're not going to be able to do as much for the organization as we could. And it does take a skilled fundraiser to be able to bring the conversation along with the prospect to help them aim high and bigger in that level. But I think that's one of the spaces that can be really exciting too, is when we're talking about individual prospect strategies and saying, what do we know about them? What do we understand about them? How has the conversation gone so far? And instead of saying, how much can we get out of them, to say they're capable of giving $2.5 million. What would it take for us to bring them along and to help them feel so connected and inspired by the possibility, the potential that they have to make an impact for us? What would it take to get them to that point where they are motivated to make that kind of a difference? And it's not necessarily about like selling the organization to them, but much more about helping them understand, how the things that they care about, their values, can be basically highlighted and illuminated and supported and bolstered by their giving to our organization, right? And so a lot of that matching is happening in that space. And the research informs that. The research, I think, plays a role in helping to fit that together, helping us build a strategy, helping us think through like, what can this look like essentially. But at the end of the day, to me, it comes down to maximizing whatever limited resources we have, whether that's time and attention or it's, the number of donors we have. And if we're only getting 1/5 of what a person could be doing for us, we're really selling ourselves short. And that's the space for me where research is super, super valuable and super important. And that one anecdote is one that just, I think, really underscores that. Hopefully that's just not a rampant problem, but I do know that it exists, right? And we're just not thinking big enough because we don't know how high, we can go with a particular person. And when we are doing the research, we can get into that space and figure out what is the limit? How high is the sky?
Moral of the story is contact your researcher.
Yeah.
Mark, this is a great place to leave it. I want to respect your time. We didn't get to AI. I'm sure we could talk about that for a long while. Possibly I'll have you come back on the show. But I think for today, this is a good place to leave it. I know we've only again scratched the surface, so I'm sure people will have some questions. I hope they have questions. How can people get in touch with you online?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, and chances are good that if someone is working in the nonprofit or fundraising space and they look for Mark Egge, I'm the one you're going to find. There is another Mark Egge working in the data and analytics space. He's somewhere else, not the real deal, but just I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there. My firm's name is Itasca Partners. I do have a website, www.itascapartners.com, and Itasca is spelled Itasca. Yeah, and those are the places, the best places to reach me. And yeah, happy to answer questions, and I could talk forever about this. So I'm so thrilled to have had the chance to chat with you, Alex, and I have many, many thoughts about AI too. So whenever you want part two, I'm down for it.
It's been a pleasure, Mark. Thank you so much, and thank you for all this work that you do.
Thank you, Alex.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.